Buckle up, because this isn't your average tech talk. Welcome to Crazy AI Unplugged with the Indian Tech Girl, an electrifying new podcast where we go behind the scenes with the sharpest minds in the industry to uncover how AI is reshaping business and what advice they have for those looking to adopt it. They not only talk AI, but also apply AI in their work. From billion-dollar startups to underground innovators, we interview and decode the people and ideas shaping the next decade. Whether you're a startup guy, business owner, or just curious about how AI might transform your industry or your life, this is your front row seat. I am India's first AI podcaster. I talk AI using AI. Follow my channel, TheIndianTechGal, for AI trends, courses, and growth hacks for your business. Watch my AI podcast with real people every week. See you there. We're diving into the future of FinTech and AI with none other than Vikram, director at Jain School of Global Management and head of research at VC fund Varanium NextGen. From being named CA Educator of the Year to CNBC's 40 Under 40, Vikram's journey spans 17 plus years across banking, startups, and AI innovation. He's the force behind the AI Eduverse, with tools like AI avatar tutors, Career Pal, and virtual classrooms, and leads global nonprofit initiatives for ethical and inclusive AI. A CA, CFA, CISA, and Maharashtra's FinTech ambassador, Vikram is not just building Gen AI tools like Eagle Eye. He's helping shape AI policy and public infrastructure across India. If you're into the future of money, learning, or tech, this episode is pure gold. Let's get into it.
Thanks for having me here. Basically, when you look at the way the typical finance person's journey works, right? So I'm CA, CFA, CISA, and from the finance background to begin with. I was from my childhood working with computers, and I was very well versed with the technology. And then using finance and technology together, which is the FinTech, as you know, of course, you can do much better job at providing the good ROI and value add in terms of how people can innovate. And the entire journey that I started with was with bank, where I spent almost more than a decade, and then around 2017 I started consulting SPGen as a director on a FinTech program and then AI initiatives as well. This fund, VC fund which I mentioned, which is Varanium VC fund, I joined my ex-Yes Bank colleague around 2019 when we started this fund. Right? So that is the overall journey so far.
That's fascinating, how you've transitioned from traditional banking to the cutting edge of AI. What major changes have you observed in this transformation?
So what are the things that I have seen in my journey? I will just summarize it quickly for you. Right? First and foremost, gone are the days when it used to take hell lot of time and effort and resources to first try out kind of a POC that you do, right? And then try to go ahead and then identify whether it is working for you or not after 6 months. The AI based workflows are now getting POC'd within a week, if not months. And when we talk about specifically whether generative AI is solution for everything, answer is no. But it is most of the times good to start with generative AI for some of the use cases where you are not clear, because the experimentation timeline with generative AI pipelines are much lower. However, there are certain clear indicators, or let's say clear no signs, where you should not use LLM from the word go, where you don't need to even think about LLMs, right? So there are multiple scenarios like that.
That's a great point about building a quick POC. But you mentioned that generative AI isn't a solution for everything. Can you elaborate on when we should avoid using LLMs?
You should not use LLM where your error threshold is very low. And when you have very complex process where the error that you are getting or facing on every step may get extrapolated, and it may get like, let's say when you are using multiple different AI agent, the error which you have, or let's say the uncertainty that you have, can snowball.
That snowballing effect of errors sounds critical, especially in financial services. Can you give us a practical example?
Beyond a point when you are using multiple different AI agents, right? So when we talk about agentic AI, or when we talk about agentic workflow, or even simple AI workflows where you have multiple different AI uh, calls which you are doing, right? And whenever you are requiring, let's say whether it is legal compliance or whether it is going to be something which is very, very low threshold for error, right? You should avoid using LLM specifically for those areas. In fact, you should start with rule-driven approach and then try to identify for the remaining areas whether LLM can work better or not, right? So I'll give you an example of real-world scenario. Take a simple scenario of a bank which is trying to use underwriting policy, right? Policy is always rule-driven. Right? You will say that, okay, I don't want to give loan to someone who is less than 25 years old, earning less than 5 lakh rupee, and living in, let's say, tier 3 city. Very simple to use, no use of LLM or any AI. It is useless, to be frank, right? Even if you are trying to figure out the accuracy part, etc., because it is completely rule driven and very few rules not required. However, you can have a workflow where you require AI to read document, read bank statement, read all the different submission, and then from that, now you are saying I will apply the rule engine which I already have. Correct? Now that is fine. Now the AI usage that you are doing is to identify certain parameter and then you are submitting those parameters to the rule engine.
So it's more about using AI for document processing and data extraction, mixed with a rule-based engine. What about accuracy requirements in such scenarios?
But in this scenario specifically, if your uncertainty level is, let's say, 80% you are certain and uncertain level is 20%, you can't go ahead, because then it is not going to be acceptable if some number goes wrong and your underwriting engine is approving that loan rather than rejecting it, right? So which clearly means that the threshold, error threshold here is going to be around 95+% of accuracy and 5% of error. If you are able to reach that kind of accuracy, then you can still go ahead, and then if you are not very certain, you can have human in the loop any which ways and show the specific findings from the document itself so that user can verify, human in the loop can verify and then approve or reject manually if
The
required.
human in the loop approach sounds like a balanced solution. How do you optimize when to involve humans versus letting AI handle things autonomously?
So that human in the loop which we are talking about, we don't want to involve human 100% of the time, but we are saying that whenever we are low in confidence at that point in time, we will try to involve human in the process.
With the kind of use cases you mentioned, integrating AI in highly regulated sectors like finance becomes even more challenging. So what are the red flags to watch out for in this space? How big is the scope of AI in FinTech with that context?
So there are overall, I have written even a report on that, but I will just share the summary of it, right? So when you look at FinTech, specifically the innovation part, when we look at not only whatever is going on, that is, let's say you know already that whenever you have some sort of writing that you require, or let's say some email that you want to send, and those are the easier use cases, right? But then we look at one step further when we are talking about the highest ROI.
You mentioned highest ROI. That's what every FinTech founder wants to hear. What would you say is the number one area where AI delivers maximum return on investment?
Segment or function that you can automate using generative AI is customer support. So if I go step by step, customer support is the highest impact area when we look at the use of generative AI. Why? Because number one, the cost to implement it is going to be much lower when you compare the volume of people. Gone are the days when you had 1,000 people call center. One step further, where it can analyze the call transcript, tell the area of improvement based on the call transcript live. It can bring the information from different system and help the customer sales representative out, saying that what should you speak when the customer is asking for certain things, right? So it is not going to just answer the query before customer service personal is joining, right? But also after that, it can assist that person so that the answers are better.
That's impressive. AI not just replacing but augmenting human agents. What's the second major area after customer support?
Second area, which is more aligning or let's say aligned with lending and the payment process. Because if you look at today, 70 to 80% of the activities which happen or transactions which happen in FinTech are either related to payments or lending. Investment and wealth management are there, but still, if you look at from the value and volume, both majority of the transactions are going to be from payments and lending.
Those are indeed the core areas. How specifically is AI transforming the lending process, especially for customers without traditional credit history?
So when we look at whether it is going to be around figuring out with the alternative data point that, okay, whether this person who is not having any credit history or that person is new to bank or NTB as we call it, right? Can I use alternative data and then use generative AI on top of it to qualify the lead? So I am creating kind of a thin file customer or converting the thin file customer where I can add more value to that person by identifying the risk which is not traditionally captured. That is one area. Similar to that, when we talk about in payment,
The thin file customer concept is fascinating. What about the KYC and document verification processes?
KYC in lending and payment both is now getting much faster and better with the help of generative AI. Because as I mentioned, look, you always require AI model to identify PAN or whatever it is, right? But with generative AI, if you are training any which is vision language model, right, or you are fine tuning the vision language model, then your time and effort that you require, or let's say the head start that some of the other companies had when they had the proprietary model only and nobody else had, that difference is now almost zero because of this LLMs where you can just fine tune.
So you're saying the competitive moats that companies built with proprietary models are disappearing?
So because of those differentiated offerings which were there in the market earlier versus standardized offerings that you have in the market today, you can easily see that that gap is narrowing. So that is one more area where the KYC itself is now getting done by the LLM, where the classification of the document, extraction of the data, etc., with the vision language model is becoming much more faster and effortless without even worrying about how to deploy my own model and create my own model. That is one more area.
That's a significant shift in the market dynamics. I've also heard about some interesting gamification approaches in FinTech. Can you tell us about that?
Then there are solutions like Confirm You and many more where they are gamifying. They are gamifying the user journey for the underwriting to figure out whether this person is lendable or not, or whether this person is good fit for your product or not. You have gamified experience. Think like this, right? Let's assume you are playing choose your own adventure game, right, with AI, and based after playing the game, your score is calculated and you are qualified for a loan. Just imagine that way, right? So you are not actively trying to apply for anything, but based on the way you interact with that game or the way you interact with the agent itself will determine your different areas like ability to pay, intent to pay, etc. And based on that, you are able to then go ahead. So the old method of filling thousands of fields in a form, or let's say hundreds of fields in a form, is getting replaced by conversational UI, which is much more easier for people to work with. And then when we go one step further, uh, today when we talk about cross selling and deep selling, right? So cross selling and deep selling is the area where RM should be knowing that customer very well. In today's environment, when your banking RM is almost changing every couple of months, right? It is very difficult for somebody to gain complete picture of you. And if AI is able to do it with a better user experience, then why not? Because you don't need to then bother about somebody staying with you forever so that the user is getting better experience. Why not AI? That is where the AI relationship managers are shining very well.
AI relationship managers sound promising. Can you give us some specific examples of how they work in practice?
So AI can then ping you saying that, look, I can see you have unused balance in your bank for more than 15, 20 days. Why don't you use one of our products, right? And deploy that fund for temporary basis. So you have, let's say, based on the nature of the client, you are showing whether it is going to be wholesale FD or retail FD, or whether it is RD, or whether it is a mutual fund that you want to sell, whatever it might be. But it is a cross-selling opportunity that you are able to get. Similar to that, when the uh, purchase is detected on credit card, again, the relationship manager itself can then uh, tell you that, look, this purchase, I can clearly see that it is towards the end of the month, not the beginning of the month. And because of that, the bill will be due immediately. So if you want, I can convert it into EMI or whatever.
This level of personalization is incredible. It's moving from mass customization to true individual personalization. How would you describe this shift?
So that experience that you are able to give, which is not mass customization, but it is more personalized to the user's own requirement. Mass personalization was something earlier where you try to create a cohort, and within the cohort, then you try to customize the offering. Now you are saying, look, I don't need to even create cohort. I can provide you the personalized to the user level, and not only to the user level, to the user level and to the event at which user requires something, right? So both user experience and when that is required, that is very critical, right? So these are the two areas. So that is the next part. And then finally, when it comes to recovery, I mentioned typically you need to create multiple different uh, mails saying that, okay, this is the due and you need to pay within this time, otherwise there is a penalty. If customer is not able to pay for whatever reason, then it can also give you in a way resolution saying that, look, I am able to provide you with three options. Maybe you can restructure your loan with this option, pay upfront 30%, and maybe remaining I can then allow you to pay in some other time. And the way you can structure, right? The manual interaction typically in this specific case may backfire. So initially you are saying let AI handle it, and if the collection with AI is not working, then only I may need to involve any human being. That is another area. And when you look at this entire life cycle, right, whether it is payment risk, whether it is fraud related classification, because of the context that LLMs are able to build today, and the memory also, because of the memory that AI is able to create about your interaction with AI. Because of these two reasons, the interaction with you as a user is much more personalized, which earlier was not the case. Over to you.
Recently, Zerida opened up an MCP server to connect with your account portfolio. So I think that's another great use of FinTech, where you can get your personalized AI stock advisor. You can ask questions about your portfolio.
The first player in India who started MCP server was Razorpay. So I have used both. You can also, interestingly, create an agent and connect with the existing MCP server like Zerodha, uh, where you can connect APIs from screener.in or Trendline. And with those screener APIs, it becomes even much better for you to then apply the filters, cuts that you want, and then directly ask Zerodha to then share the live data and then decide which one is better. So trading strategies just got much simpler for you to implement.
Before we move to the next question, you mentioned screener APIs or something around that part. Can you just explain more on that?
Basically, think like this: you have an agent which works with you and talks with you. But then you need to give skill set to the agent so that agent can visit something and bring some data. Now to visit something and bring some data, you require connectors. And these connectors are nothing but then API in the technical term. Right? So that is what I was referring to, where even without knowing the code, you can still use OpenAI specification nowadays and then use no code tool to import the specification and connect with the API without knowing any coding. So that is where it
That's
becomes.
amazing how accessible these tools have become. Now, with all these different areas where fintech can be used, I wanted to know what trends are you seeing in India's fintech startup space, and where should founders focus next? Should it be lending, or should it be payment, or should it be wealth tech, or should it be around infra? What is your take on that?
Well, I have already given you certain hot areas, right? But if you look at the top funded startups within AI, which are working with fintech, right? If you look at from that perspective, so there are set of startups which are providing fintechs with ability to comply better, right? So compliance includes, it is not limited to, but it is including your regulatory reporting, whether it is going to be, let's say, know your customer or know your transaction. So it is that kind of compliance as well. Then it is going to be cybersecurity compliance as well, because nowadays, as you know, with the SEBI's requirement and with the RBI's requirement, you have multiple different cybersecurity related workflows that you need to manage and then comply with bunch of regulations.
Compliance seems to be a major opportunity area. But from a pure business impact perspective, which verticals do you think will see the highest AI adoption?
Now, when you look at industry specific, the highest impact that I personally believe generative AI and normal AI is going to have is within the um, lending and wealth management space. These are the two major areas.
Let's dive deeper into lending. What specific areas within lending are startups focusing on?
In lending, there are startups which are working with the bank to identify which service providers, because lending as a process requires, let's say, 30-40 APIs behind the scene. So AI orchestrator can now identify that for this information that you want to seek, this is the right API provider with the best possible price. Just imagine that way. So you have a right provider at the best possible price for the information that you seek during that interaction. So this is handled by AI now. There are multiple startups in this space which are getting funded. Then when we talk about one more layer, which is more around looking at the workflow, whether it is approval workflow, whether it is workflow which is going to be around final communication to the customer and then signing the deal and then saying that okay, now there is a handoff and then you make the disbursement, this entire workflow. There are AI startups where they are just working on this workflow only, nothing else, just workflow from onboarding to disbursement. That's it, nothing more. But they are still getting funded because that part is the most difficult part to then work. And if you are able to solve that part for anyone seamlessly, then it becomes very good.
You mentioned lending and wealth management as your favorite area. Recently, RBI has cracked down on digital lenders, prepaid cards, and BNPL. Some say it's stifling innovation. What's your take? Is India over-regulating fintech?
I will tell you, first of all, um, interestingly, we had an opportunity to invest into some of these startups where RBI had to intervene, right? And it was a regulatory gray area. We never touched upon those startups because we always believed that look, compliance is something where you need to have conservatism. So you need to stay away from gray area, not jump into gray area. But from the founder's perspective, it was not something which was wrong because globally, if you look at, people thrive on the gray area and people become big enough to fail so that regulator will simply say that okay, now you did something wrong, let me bring the regulation very clearly and then let me allow you to go ahead, right? So that is where the regulator and founder will always fight, or startup ecosystem will always fight, saying that you should be very clear earlier why you were not, and then regulator will say, why were you not taking the conservative stance? So that fight is not something which you can stop as such, but as an investor, we need to then decide whether we can go with that kind of a scenario.
That is an interesting investor perspective. But do you think the regulations are actually stifling innovation? Or are they necessary for consumer protection?
But if you ask me whether it is over-regulated or not, certain areas I do believe that you can work with the startup and then try to make sure that those things or those concerns are addressed beforehand. But the good news is that only because of that, few years back, RBI had started regulatory sandbox, and not only RBI but also IDA and SEBI. They also had started their own regulatory sandbox. And in India, you have Gift City, IFSCA as well, which started with their regulatory sandbox. Which means that now, before going live with your innovation, where you doubt that it might be regulatory gray area, you can get blessings of the regulator beforehand, before you hit the market, right? And once you do that, it is a win-win for everyone.
The regulatory sandbox approach sounds promising, but there seems to be tension between allowing innovation and protecting consumers. How do you view this from the regulator's perspective?
So I do believe that if you don't allow the conversation, then it becomes very one way, or it is very difficult for people to justify that regulator is trying to do good, because they are trying to serve ultimately the customer. Regulator is mainly worried about whether customer will come running to me and then try to blame me for not regulating that enough, right? So if you look at the PPI earlier, if you remember how the PPI scenario happened, right? So there was a regulatory arbitrage where these companies which were working on prepaid instrument were effectively creating synthetic credit card. If you remember how they used to work, right? So using prepaid card, they were creating synthetic credit card, which was not something which RBI will ever allow. Right? You know why? End of the day, you cannot allow user to have that kind of a scenario where there is no credit line attached to that, but credit line is used to fill the prepaid card as and when the payment happens. They were very smart about it. I don't know whether you are aware about that entire scenario, but because this topic is not about that, but I will just summarize it very quickly. That look, if you are playing the regulatory arbitrage, right, where if 1,000 crore, if I'm borrowing as a FinTech startup, and I'm allowing people, because I know people are not going to use on average more than 60%, I'm allowing from that 1,000 crore, I'm allowing people to use 2,000 crore maybe, or maybe let's say 1,500 crore, right? Then that risk which I'm running, because I'm never funded myself, but I'm trying to then give them that leverage, which is always risky part. And not only that, because of the FLDG coming in between, what I can do if I have capital as a fintech startup of let's say 10 crore, but with FLDG requirement of maybe 5%, 10%, I can plain 100 crore, because my FLDG requirement is only 10%. So I can put 10%, which is 10 crore here, and run 100 crore of business, right? Again, very difficult for regulator to work with. So because of those reasons, that was an issue.
I see, so these regulatory interventions were actually necessary to prevent systemic risks. What's the regulator's stance on genuine innovation, though?
Innovation wise, if you look at, RBI is very happy if you use AI, if you use AI for efficiency, if you use blockchain even for efficiency, transparency. RBI is not saying no to that. Regulators are working with the startup founders today to figure out how to best proceed with the innovation.
So, you're saying it's not just about over-regulation. The regulators are genuinely trying. There are definitely areas where regulation is necessary, but they also seem open to innovation and collaboration. You mentioned that founders can approach regulators to better understand the process when starting something new. But for first-time founders who aren't well connected, how can they actually do that? Is there a simple or accessible way for them to reach out to regulators?
There are two ways. One is regulatory sandbox way, which is not difficult, but it is kind of a limiting because they run certain themes. And then they have started, I think, few months back. They also had on tap, means that whatever you have, you just try to apply. So when the on tap theme is running, you can go ahead and whenever you want, you can apply, right? And you can do that. But if they are not doing on tap, so for example, RBI does on tap, maybe SEBI or IDA does not do that. So in that scenario, you can't go with the open-ended theme. You need to work within the theme that they are working during that time. Right? So that is one thing. But second, which is more open specifically for fintech, is around RBI's fintech week or fintech day. It is fintech day. I think it is some last Thursday, similar to how you have your derivative closer, right? Like that you have last Thursday of the month or something like that. I forgot exact date, but during that day, uh, any fintech can meet the regulator and discuss whatever they want. So these are the two channels that you can explore. One channel is much more official. So if you are selected as a part of the cohort in regulatory sandbox, you are legally, it is the official and legally binding channel for the regulator to work with you. While the second channel is more informal discussion with the regulator, and there is no like legal backing as such that you can just get out of it. But it is still much better for you to get some clarity and then understand what is the legal remedy if you want to proceed. Right? That is the idea.
So, informal channels like OnTap, which you mentioned, are available in which cities?
Yeah, that is not city wise. That is for the entire India as such. So if you look at RBI's regulatory sandbox, right? If you, I will share with you.
Yeah, so that will be very useful for whoever is trying to start fintech startups. Can start looking into it. It will be super useful information. So getting to my next question. We see a lot of wrapper-based models, neobanks without licenses, lending via NBFCs. Is fintech truly disrupting banking or just repackaging it?
Be very blunt, it is in India at least, it is always going to be repackaging. Never ever it was possible in India to just try to go and replace the bank. They are just trying to first replace the banking front end. And then they are trying to plug in the different value proposition from multiple different banking partnership. Right? So when we are talking from that perspective, they are in a way glorified distributor, right? With the application interface for the user.
That's quite a blunt assessment. Can you break down the fintech landscape into different categories for us?
So most of the fintechs, if you just look at the fintech arena, you will find four quadrant. Either the fintechs are simply providing the support and services. Then you have aggregation part, where you have Bank Bazaar, Paisa Bazaar kind of a startup where you are working with a bunch of banks and financial institution, aggregating it for the user, allowing user to compare the features, etc., and then work with the bank to provide those services. Right? So that is another area. Then you can work with the bank and create a new product itself, whether it is a co-branded credit card with new feature. So you have a bunch of companies within that, right, where they provide co-branded credit card with certain extra service. Or you can work as a distributor only, where you are trying to become just part of the value chain and you will distribute on behalf of one particular bank or one particular insurance company. So that is another play. So you can fit into any one or more of this different quadrant. Even if you do all of this, right? Let's say Cred does all of this. So even if you do all of this, to make good enough margin, you still need to have regulatory licenses so that you can keep more and you keep less on the table for the bank. So I hope that answers your question, saying that which is the part of the value chain where you can create a value. Right? Otherwise, fintech without backing of the bank, you can hardly do much.
You know, when we met at the Google office, you had highlighted new browser agents and lots of other tools coming in. Can you give an insight around that part to our viewers?
Today, AI can replicate you, and that becomes your digital persona, digital avatar, which you can also now transfer to your legal nominees, right? Which creates a new way of interacting and believing on the wealth. You have Delphi in India, you have Brahma, and like many more players who are working on this specific area, where you can clone yourself, clone with your personal information, financial information, etc.
These are really interesting tools and insights about that part. So now just quick 2 rapid-fire questions. What are your favorite AI tools which you personally use?
As a researcher, however, I need to use multiple tools, but favorite if you ask me, right? So I use everyday Claude and ChatGPT as a chat client. When it comes to bookmarks and all those things, I use Raindrop tool, which is specifically to bookmark certain website with the help of AI. But then I use to create agentic workflow, etc. I use Flowise and Diffie. So that is the tool which I use to create no-code workflows. Then when it comes to email uh, clients where it can help me work very quickly on summarizing, etc. I have created something on my own because I never trust third party to read my emails and do something about it. So I have created my own solution where it uses my own desktop. I use Olama to then work with that. So that is my own custom tool, which I use to read the Outlook email, create a summary on a few hourly basis, and then prioritize the work for me, saying, okay, now this is most critical today. Because you can understand, typically someone like me will get thousands of emails, right? And for me to then prioritize manually is almost impossible. So that tool does that for me. Then I use Feedly as a tool to mix and merge different fields from different areas. And then I use AI on top of it to summarize the news for me so that it becomes a nice dashboard looking thing. I use Replit a lot for specifically creating certain PoCs and certain quick and dirty solutions for the team and for me so that I can start using it quickly without going for very time consuming development process. There are many more.
That's amazing. You know, the people who come on this podcast, they don't just talk about AI, they actually use AI. They have dived into it, and so they are the best people to tell our audience about real-world applications. Love the depth and the kind of deep R&D focus you bring.
Thanks.
Now, as we wrap up, what's your message to our listeners, the AI enthusiasts, creators, coders, and founders who are building in the AI era?
So look, I will say that AI is something which you should always use as a tool. Of course, if you don't use as a tool, then the issue is that somebody else who is less capable than you, but with AI, they can become much more capable than you. And because of that, if you still want to keep ahead of the curve and maintain competitive edge, you must use AI, whether it is with programming, without programming, doesn't matter. You should always tweak and tinker with whatever you can make on your own. And AI is one space today where you don't need to know any programming language. You can work with English as a programming language, as we call it, and with no-code tools, just drag and drop and linking certain things. If you even know the basic understanding, right, you can take AI's help to build certain basic workflow, and then you can yourself increase your productivity. That is first advice. And second advice is that you need to at least spend 2 hours on a weekly basis minimum. I spend 2 hours daily, but you need to spend 2 hours weekly minimum in whatever area you are, whether it is supply chain, whether it is some other area, banking, financial services, whatever area you are in. Just spend 2 hours to stay informed about whatever changes are happening and how AI is impacting your particular area, so that you can at least know where you are and what you need to do further. So these are the two very simple advice.
The passion and depths which you have shared, I could clearly sense the passion which you carry for this entire area and how deep your expertise is. This will be a great, great podcast for FinTech founders and people who want to see how research in this space actually happens. And how can everyone reach out to you if they want to connect or need any help?
So LinkedIn is the only social media platform I'm active on, frankly. So LinkedIn is open for everyone to join.
Perfect. We'll include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Vikram, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with our audience today.